For over a century, popular culture has pictured Jack the Ripper as an aristocratic genius in a top hat, hunting in the fog. The actual Metropolitan Police Archives from 1888 record a colder, more clinical reality. This photograph shows the dense, brick-terraced housing of Whitechapel. At the time, roughly 78,000 people were crammed into a single square mile, defined by extreme poverty, open drains, and relentless overcrowding. These 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, lived on the absolute margins of the city. They were seeking 4 pence for a communal lodging house bed, often forced to sell casual sex just to afford a place to sleep. The police tasked with protecting them were operating blind. The 1888 Metropolitan Police had no fingerprinting and no blood typing. Officers patrolled the labyrinth of courts and alleys on highly predictable 30-minute foot rotations. The killer exploited this systemic vacuum. He operated in a neighborhood where vulnerable people were routinely ignored, and where the police lacked the scientific tools to track a stranger. This illustration places us inside the coroner's inquests, where police surgeons like Dr. Llewellyn and Dr. Phillips documented the victim's trauma. Their testimony reveals a rapid, clinical escalation in violence across the first murders in August and September. Yet outside the courtroom, the actual crime scenes were chaotic. Constables frequently moved the bodies and washed away blood before any spatial analysis could take place, irrevocably contaminating their own evidence. Investigators were also hindered by a severe procedural blind spot. They assumed the murderer must be a known associate of the victims. The concept of a stranger committing unprovoked serial homicide did not exist in their investigative playbook. These repeated procedural failures handed the killer a protective shield. Because the police applied methods entirely unsuited to the physical reality of the crimes, the attacker could operate without leaving a usable trail. This map tracks September 30th. Interrupted while murdering Elizabeth Stride, the killer struck again 45 minutes later in Mitre Square. But Mitre Square fell in the City of London's jurisdiction. Suddenly, 2 completely separate police forces were competing over the same investigation. This is Sir Charles Warren, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. A bloody piece of Eddowes' apron was found dropped beneath a chalked message on Goulston Street. Fearing the message would spark an anti-Semitic riot, Warren explicitly ordered the writing erased before it could be photographed. By prioritizing political optics over evidence preservation, the police actively destroyed the only physical trace that linked the killer to his escape route. By November 9th, the violence moved indoors. Mary Jane Kelly was murdered inside her own locked room. The safety of a private, enclosed space allowed the killer's mutilation to reach its absolute physical apex. Examining Kelly's room, police surgeon Dr. Thomas Bond produced one of the earliest criminal profiles. He concluded the killer actually lacked surgical training and was instead driven by a severe homicidal and erotic mania. Investigative momentum hit a wall. Investigators finally grasped the psychological profile of the predator they were hunting, but then the murders abruptly stopped. This collage of newspaper sketches and letters shows how the Victorian media filled the investigative void. While the killer himself remained completely silent at the crime scenes, the press generated a deafening amount of noise, heavily publicizing a red-inked note known as the Dear Boss letter. By allowing this likely journalist hoax to coin the name Jack the Ripper, the police inadvertently triggered thousands of fake confession letters. The investigation drowned in useless tips, and a street-level predator was elevated into a permanent myth. When you examine the surviving primary files today, the reality is stark. None of the major historical suspects, including Aaron Kosminski and Montague Druitt, ever met the standard of legal proof. Jack the Ripper slipped through the cracks of a fractured justice system, an opportunistic predator in a society that refused to look at its most vulnerable citizens until they were dead.